Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us once again. Kamala Harris is hitting the campaign trail hard. She's hitting a theme that's not common in most presidential campaigns, and that's teachers' salaries. We're wondering why. It's usually either a local campaign issue for local politicians or the frontline battles of teachers' unions around the country, among the issues they fight for. Senator Harris wants to invest $315 billion in her first term as president, should she win, of course, and in her first year raise all teacher salaries by over $13,000, and then match states $3 for every one they spend. It is a political move that could gain support from Democratic-leaning and Republican-leaning states around the country, given the strikes that have been taking place. Some education activists, while supporting the idea, say that teachers' salaries are just part of what's driving the teachers' moves and strikes around this country, and what we need more is investment in our public education system across the board. We are joined by Dr. Lois Weiner, who is a former professor of education and an independent education researcher and consultant on Teachers Union, a noted author of numerous books, including Future of Our Schools, Teachers Unions, and Social Justice. And Lois Weiner, welcome to the Real News. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's just start with this little clip that from Senator Harris on a news show where she describes a bit about what she's talking about.
We're going to pay for it by adjusting the estate tax. Right now, it's only $11 million and up, and we need to lower that so that we can actually pay what we want in terms of knowing that we want to invest in our teachers and the future of our country. In terms of how we came about this legislation, it's simple. I've been traveling the country meeting teachers who are working 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Over 90% of our teachers are coming out of their own pocket to pay for school supplies.
No, I'm talking about that figure, Senator,
yeah,
that specific figure. Yeah.
Sure, Gail. So the data is very clear that teachers are, as compared to other college graduates, receiving 11% less in pay across the country. So we have data that supports this point, and that is the equivalent of about $13,500 a year. And $13,500 a year is the equivalent of a year's worth of mortgage payments, the equivalent of a year's worth of grocery bills, the equivalent of paying down student loans for a year. So it's a very significant amount of money.
So, Dr. Lois Weiner, I mean, this is a very, very, I think, shrewd in many ways political move on the part of Senator Harris. It clearly touches the home front for many teachers and many parents whose kids are in public school. But there was a lot to all these strikes happening around the country, and I covered almost all of them. And one of the things that seemed to be, whether it was in California or Oklahoma or West Virginia or here in Annapolis and Maryland, where we broadcast from, in Baltimore, teachers' salaries were always part of this larger of these issues, but it was just one of the issues that had to do with bolstering public education. So talk about what you think this all means, both politically and in terms of that larger question that so many teachers are fighting for.
Well, I think that, first of all, there's no question that Harris is trying to seduce people who support the walkouts of teachers for increased educational funding by putting forward this proposal on teacher pay. But I want to just note the way I put it, that the walkouts have been about increased educational funding. They have not just been about teachers' pay. And I think that in casting the measure as Harris did, and the proposal as she did, focusing on teacher pay without discussing educational funding at large, I think this is a special effort to woo the activists in the teachers' unions and perhaps to get the nomination of both the AFT and the NEA. But I don't think that the proposal to focus just on teachers' pay is resonating among activists in the movement. There are some people, I spend a lot of time on social media with people who are activists, and there are people who are saying, well, we finally have a candidate who's talking about teacher pay, but there are a lot of other people who are saying, we don't want an increase in pay if it means that the money is going to come out of schools' budgets that are otherwise paying for aides or counselors, after-school programs, et cetera, class size. So I don't think that the proposal is going to have the resonance that Harris thinks it's going to, nor the resonance that the leaders of both teachers' unions think it's going to have. And I'll just add that immediately after Harris made the proposal, it was touted as being a great idea by Arne Duncan, who was, of course, the head of the Department of Education under Obama and responsible for many of the most deleterious reforms that schools are dealing with right now.
So I don't disagree with what you were saying. However, when you look around the country, and of course I know who Arne Duncan is, and I've seen what he's been saying. On the other hand, the polls from across the country show that teachers and parents and communities really do support this idea of teachers needing more money, having greater salaries. They're not being paid enough for the work that they do, and the teachers often are degraded in some parts because of the feminization of the profession, but also just because they're not respected enough to be paid the money, and we don't invest money in public education. So I mean, so on that level, politically, this might appeal to a real broad spectrum of people for her and her campaign.
I think it does. I think that it's important to note that the demand for increased teacher salaries has been a unifying demand of the movement and of the walkouts. That's something that has been a unifying demand. It is also not the only demand.
Right.
And we see, for instance, in Los Angeles, that the demand for more counselors and the demand for support services and all kinds of demands that related to relations with the community were equally important. That salary wasn't the key demand in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is, after all, the second largest city in this country. So while I think there is a resonance, a popular resonance for supporting increase in teacher salaries, I think that Harris's proposal is in some ways clickbait. And so she's making a feint, a political feint, to the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act, LBJ's War on Poverty. I think that's important. At the same time, when you look at the specifics of the proposal, the specifics have a neoliberal cast. So those specifics, as I say, the devil is in the details, those specifics are very, very important. And I just want to point out that Harris in 2016 received contributions from Eli Broad, Reed Hastings, and Lorene Powell Jobs.
And these people are?
These people are billionaires who are prominent backers of the privatization agenda in education, of merit pay for teachers, of standardized testing to evaluate teachers and students, of creation of charter schools, of outsourcing education services like school bus drivers or security guards, everything, lunch programs. So at the same time that Harris prosecuted an online for-profit charter school in California, she was taking contributions from Reed Hastings, who was one of the primary financial backers of online charter schools and of charter schools in the state of California. So, I mean, this really, I think this contradiction in Harris really captures the problem that people who have been aligned with Democrats for education reform, who are the Democrats who have really advanced the bipartisan privatization agenda.
Right.
It really captures the problem that they have, that agenda is being rejected. It is that agenda against which teachers have mobilized and organized. And one of the best examples is actually the Denver strike, because Denver, NEA and the Colorado affiliate of the NEA poured money into Denver to get Denver teachers to agree to merit pay. It was the only one of the first places where they could get teachers to actually vote to agree to have merit pay replace the traditional salary schedule where you're reimbursed, where you're paid according to years of experience and also years of education, right? The salary ladder. And that had been the dream of the far right, was to get rid of the salary schedule of teaching for teachers, and they succeeded in Denver. Exactly the same thing happened in Newark, New Jersey. The AFT sent organizers in, the National Union sent organizers in to try to persuade the Newark teachers to accept merit pay. Of course, Cory Booker was the mayor during that time. And, you know, what always happens is that there's a little money, or there may even be big money in the first year, and then the money dries up. That's so, and they use the rhetoric of improving school quality and especially improving opportunity and opportunities for low-income kids of color and educational opportunity. They've used that as a cover for privatization. So I think that you have to look at the specifics of the Harris proposal, applaud the fact that we finally have a presidential candidate who's talking about doing something about schools. Education has really not been on the agenda so far with any of the presidential candidates from the Democratic Party. So that's good, but you have to look at the specifics. And the one thing that Harris is not talking about is per pupil expenditures. How much we're going to spend on education as a whole per student. She's not talking about that.
So let me this is another clip I want to play, because I want to jump into this last conversation about the final conversation for today about this, which has to do with the federal government's role in all of this, and what this portends for activists and what this might mean for the campaign to come. But this is what she had to say in terms of federalism, and harking back to what you were talking about earlier with Lyndon Baines Johnson, with LBJ and his move in education.
LBJ was probably the last president who really put a substantial investment in the public education system of our country, and we reaped huge rewards for that. And that's how I think of this. Where the states cannot act, we should actually support them. And so specifically what we are proposing is that there would be a federal match, 3-to-1, in terms of what the states can give and then what the federal government will give to match state funding.
So let's talk about that. I mean, so that was a different era. Coming out of the end of segregation and the push for more federal involvement in lots of parts of our country that have been pushed back over the last 50 years. But let's talk about what that agenda might mean for the country.
This issue of the federal role in education is a complete red herring.
What do you mean?
We have to understand that, because No Child Left Behind, when ESEA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, was transformed with a bipartisan agreement into No Child Left Behind, that was a huge role for the federal government. The federal government really began to configure what goes on in public education. And how did they do that? Why was the federal government able to do that when the Constitution says that education is the responsibility of the states? The way they did that is that they leveraged the relatively small amount of money that they give to school districts and to states. In most states, it is well under 2 digits, right? Well under 10%, and it's been dropping. They leverage that money by saying, if you do not agree to these standards, you're not going to get any federal money.
Right.
That's what they did. So it's very important that we understand that the federal role in education has been huge for the past 15 years. Absolutely huge. So what we're talking about is increasing the amount of money that the federal government gives to schools. That's what we're talking about here. But the question is, what are the conditions under which we're going to give that money?
Well, that's the question I want to ask. What's just in terms of this campaign, in terms of the activists in the unions and the activists among teachers and communities, what they're demanding for their kids. I mean, there's no other issue. There are very few other issues that really touch home as deeply in American families as education. So the question is, what is missing here, and how do you think this is going to play out? What do you think the demands might be otherwise?
Well, first I want to say that I think that health care also reaches into U.S. homes, as does
Right.
affordable housing. And that's part of what Harris isn't talking about. And I think that we need to contextualize money for teacher salaries by saying that even well-paid teachers, a well-paid professional teaching force, is not much good if the kids don't show up to school because they're living in homeless shelters, right? Or they're living in their parents' car. So, or if the family is under stress and the kids don't have health care. So, I think that many teachers are unwilling to say that teacher salaries are more important or should be counterposed to improving our health care system and having single-payer health care or having affordable housing. In fact, that was one of the demands in the Oakland teachers' strike.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I think that I think that what we're looking for, I think that what the movement is looking for, movement is looking for candidates who will defend the promise of public education, of a quality system of public education, and at the same time not say that education can be the vehicle to pull people out of poverty. And that has been the rhetoric, that education is the one true path out of poverty, was Arne Duncan's line with Obama and with the Democrats in this bipartisan project. And I think that coming up with a more nuanced description of the role of public education in the society, in a democracy, what it can do and what it can't do, is part of the challenge for the movement.
Well, Dr. Lois Weiner, this has been fascinating. I look forward to a lot more down this campaign trail as we see how this unfolds and where teachers' union fit and how education becomes part of this campaign debate on the future. And thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for joining us here today on the Real News Network.
Mark.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Thank you so much for joining us.